The clock on the boardroom wall read 9:06. 6 minutes. Riven Kale hadn't moved. Hadn't shifted. Hadn't touched the glass of water placed in front of him exactly 22 minutes ago by an assistant who hadn't made eye contact since. He just sat there, watching the empty chairs. 12 seats. 12 executives. 12 people who had been sent a calendar invite, a confirmation email, and a personal reminder call the night before. 0 of them had walked through that door. The city stretched out behind him through 60 feet of floor-to-ceiling glass, towers cutting into a pale morning sky, traffic crawling 40 stories below, the whole machine of the world turning like it always did. Indifferent. Relentless. Riven picked up his phone. 1 call. 4 words. Pull their access cards. He set it back down. No raise in his voice. No visible anger. Just that flat, quiet certainty, the kind that didn't need volume because it had already decided what came next. HI viewers, have you ever been in a room where one person said nothing, but everyone else was terrified? Within 4 minutes, the building responded. Security teams appeared on 3 floors simultaneously. Desk phones started ringing with calls no one wanted to answer. 2 vice presidents were found mid-coffee in the break room. One was still in the elevator when his keycard stopped working between floors 31 and 32. Careers that had taken decades to build. Gone before the morning briefing ended. The boardroom stayed silent. Riven hadn't left his chair. But then, something made him stop. At the far end of the table, in the last seat closest to the window, a man sat completely still. Dark skin. Sharp jaw. Eyes that weren't panicking, weren't apologizing, weren't calculating an exit. Just watching. Like he'd already seen this part before. Riven studied him for 3 full seconds, which, for Riven Kale, was a long time. You should be gone, Riven said. Not loud. Precise. The man didn't flinch. Probably, he said. But I stayed. Riven's eyes narrowed by exactly 1 degree. Who are you? The man leaned back slightly. Unhurried. Like the question didn't threaten him at all. Kairos Vale. Systems consultant. It's on the badge. I know what the badge says. A pause. Brief. Surgical. Then what you're really asking, Kairos said, is why the badge doesn't match the man. The room held that sentence for a moment. Riven didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because Kairos was right, and they both knew it, and the fact that this man had just said that out loud, in this room, after watching an entire executive team get erased in under 5 minutes, that was either the bravest thing Riven had ever witnessed. Or the most calculated. Get me everything on him, Riven said into his phone, eyes still fixed on Kairos. Full pull. I want it in 20 minutes. Kairos didn't react to that either. He just looked at Riven with those steady, unreadable eyes and said, quietly, almost to himself, You're going to find it interesting, what comes back. The search came back in 18 minutes. And it came back empty. Not incomplete. Not restricted. Not classified. Empty. No employment trail. No tax records. No address history. No school enrollment. No digital footprint of any kind. Like the man sitting at the far end of that table had been constructed 48 hours ago and placed there specifically for this morning. The security chief called back, voice lower than usual. Sir, we flagged him on entry 2 days ago. Standard protocol. But when we ran his biometrics again just now. Static. A pause that lasted too long. We can't locate him on any internal feed from the last hour. Riven turned slowly. The chair at the end of the table was empty. Kairos' veil was gone. And the only thing left behind was a single sheet of paper, face down, placed exactly where his hands had been resting. Riven walked the length of the table. Picked it up. Turned it over. On it, in clean, unhurried handwriting, were 6 words. You don't control as much as you think. The report landed on Riven's desk at 11:47 a.m. 40 pages. Blank. Not blank like corrupted. Not blank like redacted. Blank like someone had reached into every database his team accessed and scraped it clean before the query even finished running. Riven read the front page twice. Then he closed it. Set both palms flat on the desk. Breathed once through his nose. This was not a data error. Someone had done this intentionally, quickly, quietly, and completely. His head of intelligence, Damon Cross, stood across the desk looking like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days even though it was barely noon. We cross-referenced federal employment rosters, private contractor networks, 3 offshore registries, and 2 gray market surveillance databases, Damon said. Every single return came back with nothing. The name Kairos Vale does not exist anywhere with a paper trail attached. And yet he has a building badge, Riven said. A desk assignment. A department. Yes, sir. Which means someone put him here. Yes, sir. Find out who signed off on his intake. Damon's jaw tightened slightly. That's the other thing. The HR file for his onboarding, it was created 6 days ago. The signature on the intake form belongs to Marcus Webb. Riven went still. Marcus Webb had been dead for 3 years. That detail landed in the room like something physical. Both men felt it. Pull every badge scan from the last 48 hours, Riven said. Every elevator log, every camera timestamp. I want to know every room he entered and every person he was within 20 feet of. Damon nodded and left without another word. Riven turned to the window. The city below kept moving. People streaming across intersections, cars changing lanes, the whole mechanical rhythm of a place that didn't care what happened inside glass towers. It never did. He thought about the way Kairos had sat in that chair. Not afraid. Not performing confidence either, because performed confidence had a tell. A slight oversteadiness. A jaw held too still. An eye that checked reactions just a half-second too often. Kairos had none of that. He just existed in that room. Comfortable in the middle of destruction. Which meant one of 2 things. He'd been in rooms like that before. Or he'd caused them. By 2 p.m., the badge scan report was on Riven's phone. Kairos had entered the building at 7:14 a.m., nearly 2 hours before the meeting. He'd accessed the executive floor, the data center corridor on 37, and according to a log that made Riven read it 3 separate times, the private server room on 39. Clearance level for 39, executive only. Biometric lock. No exceptions. Kairos had walked through it like it wasn't there. Riven forwarded the log to Damon. Damon called back in under 90 seconds. The biometric record shows his scan was approved by a ghost credential, Damon said. The access profile it came from was deactivated 2 years ago. Someone reactivated it from inside our own network. From inside our system, sir, not external. Riven set the phone down without ending the call. He stared at the opposite wall for exactly 4 seconds. Someone inside his organization had opened the door for Kairos Vale. That meant this wasn't a break-in. It was an invitation. The question that followed that realization was worse than the realization itself. Who inside his empire would invite in a ghost? He pulled up the camera feed for the 39th floor hallway, the one immediately outside the server room. The timestamp matched the badge log. The hallway was empty. Riven scrubbed backward through the footage. Empty. 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 Then, for exactly 11 seconds, the feed cut to static. Came back. Empty hallway again. 11 seconds. Enough time to enter. Not enough time to leave. Riven picked up his phone. I want every person on this floor pulled for questioning. No exceptions. No courtesy calls first. He ended the call. Stood. Walked to the private elevator at the end of his floor and rode it up 2 levels. The server room door on 39 was closed. Sealed. Green light on the panel, all clear, no active access. Riven pressed his palm to the reader. The door opened. He stepped inside. The room hummed low, rows of black servers running quiet, the temperature controlled to the degree, the light that pale blue-gray that made everything look clinical. And at the far end of the room, sitting in a chair in front of a terminal that should not have been active, was Cairo's Vale. He turned before Riven spoke. Like he'd heard the elevator 2 floors down. You shouldn't be here, Cairo said. Not alarmed. Not caught. Just stating a fact. Riven took 3 steps into the room. That's an interesting thing to say to a man inside his own building. Kairos didn't answer that. He turned back to the terminal. Pressed 2 keys. The screen went dark. What were you looking at? Riven asked. Kairos stood slowly. Adjusted his jacket. Met Riven's eyes with that same impossible calm. Something you've never seen, he said. Even though it's been here the whole time. He walked toward the exit, unhurried, like Riven wasn't blocking the path, and stopped when they were 2 feet apart. Ask your team to pull the archived transaction layers from 2019 onward, Kairos said quietly. Specifically the ones flagged for cross-border reconciliation. Look at what got buried. He held Riven's gaze for 1 second longer than felt comfortable. Then he moved past him. And Riven, who had never let anyone move past him in his life without permission, stood exactly where he was. Because something Kairos had just said stopped every other thought cold. Cross-border reconciliation. That was an internal code phrase. One used only inside Riven's most private financial architecture. One that had never been written in any external document. One that only 4 people alive were supposed to know. Riven turned slowly. The server room door was already closed. Kairos was gone again. The first deal fell apart at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Clean collapse. No warning. No leak negotiation. No competing offer. The kind of deal that had been locked, signatures scheduled, wire instructions confirmed, 2 years of positioning finally paying out, and then, overnight, the acquiring firm's lead partner withdrew. Completely. Citing nothing. Returning every document and signed. Riven's team spent 4 hours trying to figure out why. They couldn't. The second thing happened 3 days later. One of Riven's longest-standing silent partners, a man named Taro Okafor, connected to 6 different revenue streams across 4 continents, stopped answering. Not the kind of quiet where a man steps back from business. The other kind. His office cleared out. His number disconnected. His assistant gone. Taro Okafor, by all digital evidence, had ceased to exist. Nobody had a body. Nobody had a forwarding address. Nobody had anything. And the third thing, that was the one that made Riven's entire executive floor go quiet for the better part of a morning. An anonymous data package dropped to 3 major financial publications simultaneously. Inside, internal communications from a subsidiary Riven had acquired in 2021. Communications that detailed, in unambiguous language, a pattern of payments routed through shell accounts to avoid regulatory review. Riven hadn't known about those payments. That was the part that burned. His own subsidiary. His own acquisition. His own name on the holding company documents. And he hadn't known. By 10 a.m., his legal team was already running containment. By noon, 2 board members had called requesting an emergency session. By 2 p.m., His PR director had drafted 3 versions of a public statement, and was asking which one Riven wanted to release. Riven said none of them. He sat in his office with the door closed, and went back through the timeline. The failed deal. Okafor's disappearance. The leak. 3 separate events. 3 separate arms of his organization. All within 8 days. He pulled the internal movement logs from that same window. Cairo's veil had been present, somewhere on the premises. During all 3. Not directly involved. No fingerprints on any of it. Just nearby. Moving through departments like a current beneath water, no visible surface disturbance, but something shifting underneath. Riven called Damon. I need real-time tracking on the systems consultant. Every floor. Every access point. Every person he speaks to. We tried that, Damon said carefully. Try harder. A pause. Sir, our surveillance team flagged something this morning. The cameras on 32 and 36 have been cycling on a 30-second delay. Not a glitch. Someone inserted a loop. Whoever did it used internal credentials. Riven said nothing for a moment. How long has the loop been running? At least 6 days. 6 days. That was before the first deal collapsed. Before Okafor disappeared. Before the leak. Riven ended the call and stood at his window for a long time. He'd built this company from a single acquisition at 26. He'd survived hostile takeovers, regulatory investigations, 3 recessions, and 2 assassination attempts that never made the news. He had contingency plans for contingency plans. He controlled outcomes, always, before situations had a chance to become problems. He did not get caught unaware, which made what was happening now feel like something different from a threat. It felt like a lesson. At 4:30 that afternoon, Riven walked the floor himself. No security detail. No assistant. Just him moving through his own building the way he used to when it was still small enough that he knew every employee by name. He found Kairos on the 34th floor, standing at the edge of an open-plan workspace, watching the team below with his arms loosely at his sides. Not working. Observing. Like an analyst studying a system, not the people, but the pattern of how they moved. Riven stopped beside him. Neither of them looked at the other. You've been busy, Riven said. Have I? Kairos replied. Not a question. 3 major disruptions in 8 days. Every time, you're in the building. Correlation, Kairos said. Not causation. That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one. Riven finally turned to look at him. Are you protecting this company? He asked. Or taking it apart? Kairos didn't answer immediately. He watched the floor below for 3 more seconds. Someone delivering a report, 2 analysts disagreeing over a spreadsheet, a junior staffer moving too fast between desks. Then he said, What if the answer is the same thing? That sat between them for a moment. Okafor, Riven said quietly. Where is he? Kairos turned to meet his eyes. No flinch. No hesitation. Somewhere he can't hurt anyone else. Riven stared at him. And the communications leak? Information that was always going to surface, Kairos said. The only question was whether it surfaced on your terms or someone else's. Now it's out. Now you can respond. Now you have a choice. He paused. Before you didn't. The floor hummed below them. Air conditioning. Keyboards. The low hum of a building doing what buildings do. Riven felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he was 2 steps behind. Tonight, Riven said finally, my team is going to pull every access log from the last 30 days. Every door. Every credential. Every timestamp. I know, Kairos said. And we're going to find you in places you shouldn't be. Probably. and then I'm going to need an explanation. Kairos looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind those steady eyes, not fear, not satisfaction. Something closer to decision. Then come to 39, he said. Tonight. After 9. He turned and walked back toward the elevator. Riven watched him go. And for the first time since the morning of the emptied boardroom, standing in his own building, inside his own empire, surrounded by people who answered to him and only him, Riven Kale felt something he could not immediately name. It wasn't anger. It was closer to the feeling of standing at a window on a high floor and realizing, without warning, without anyone telling you, that the glass wasn't as thick as you thought. Riven arrived at 39 at 9:07 p.m. Late on purpose. He didn't know why he'd done that. Made himself 7 minutes late to something that wasn't even a scheduled meeting, wasn't a negotiation, wasn't anything he'd agreed to in any formal sense. Just a man who might or might not be there, in a room that shouldn't be accessible to him, saying things Riven didn't have context for yet. But he made himself wait downstairs. Because showing up exactly on time felt like conceding something. And Riven Kale did not concede things. The server room was lit the same pale blue-gray as before. Kairos was there. Of course he was. Standing with his back to the door, both hands in his pockets, facing a second terminal that had been positioned alongside the first. 2 screens now, both active. He didn't turn when Riven entered. Close the door, Kairos said. Riven closed it. Come here. Riven crossed the room slowly. Deliberately. Each step measured, not cautious, but deliberate, the way a man walks when he wants the other person to know he's choosing to move, not being led. He stopped beside Kairos and looked at the screens. At first, it looked like a standard financial architecture map. The kind his analysts built during quarterly reviews. Revenue streams, subsidiary chains, holding company structures, cross-border allocations. Then Kairos zoomed out. And the map became something else entirely. Layers appeared beneath the visible structure. Not metaphorically. Literally beneath, rendered in a different color, connected by lines that ran parallel to the legitimate architecture but never overlapped with it. A second system. Built to mirror the first from a safe distance. What is this? Riven said. It wasn't quite a question. More like a man trying to make his voice steady. This, Kairos said, is what your company actually does. He let that land. Then he started talking. The offshore shell network had been in place since 2017. 2 years before Riven's first major international acquisition. It had been constructed by the legal and financial team inherited with that acquisition. Not built by Riven. Not approved by Riven. Not even presented to Riven. Just absorbed into the structure of what he took over, the way rot absorbs into wood that looks solid from the outside. The financial pipelines ran clean money through a series of holding entities in 4 jurisdictions. Legitimate on the surface, clean on paper, auditable if you only looked at the first layer. But the second layer routed payments to groups Riven had never heard of. Groups with no public presence. No legitimate industry affiliation. Kairos pulled up a map. Physical, not financial. Transport routes. 12 of them. Moving across 3 continents. These aren't cargo manifests, Riven said. No, Kairos said. They're not. The room went quiet. Really quiet. The hum of the servers, which had been constant, background noise, suddenly felt very loud. Riven stared at the screen. Human trafficking. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. The routes, the shell company structures, the payment chains, it was all there, mapped clean and precise on a screen inside his own server room. Inside his own building. Operating under his name. The worst kind of power isn't the one that acts. Kairos said quietly. It's the one that operates without being seen. I didn't know, Riven said. His voice came out different than he expected. Not defensive. Just stripped of everything that usually cushioned it. I know you didn't, Kairos said. How do you know that? Kairos turned to look at him directly. Because I've been watching this empire for 14 months. I know what you authorized and what you didn't. I know where your signature is and where it's absent. I know what you were shown during that acquisition and what was deliberately kept in the folder you never received. He paused. You inherited a kingdom, but not its secrets. Riven didn't move for a long time. He looked at the map. The routes. The layers beneath the layers. He thought about the acquisition. The team that had come with it, the lawyers, the financial architects, the systems managers he'd kept on because they knew the infrastructure and transition efficiency made sense, and there was always another deal to close, and he trusted the numbers because the numbers were clean. The numbers were always clean. Because they'd made sure of that. Who else knows about this? Riven said. Inside your organization? Kairos said. 11 people. 3 of them are senior enough to have stopped it at any point. They chose not to. Names. In time. Riven looked at him. I want them now. I know, Kairos said. But if I give them to you right now, tonight in this room, while you look like that, what you do next won't be clean. And clean is the only way this ends in your favor. That stopped Riven cold. Because Kairos wasn't wrong. And the fact that this man, this ghost, this name that isn't a name, understood exactly what Riven was about to do, and exactly why it would be a mistake, and was choosing to slow him down instead of let him burn it all in a way that destroyed himself in the process. That wasn't the behavior of someone who wanted his empire dismantled. You could have given this to law enforcement, Riven said. Federal authorities. Any one of 3 regulatory agencies that would have had warrants by morning. Yes, Kairos said. Why didn't you? Kairos looked back at the screen. For the first time since Riven had met him, that perfect, measured stillness shifted. Not much. Just a fraction. Something that looked almost like it cost him something to say. Because the people buried in those routes don't have time for a 2-year federal investigation, he said. They need it stopped. Fast. Quietly. From inside. He paused. And for that, I need the man whose name is on the building to actually know what's in it. The server room hummed. Riven stared at the map. 12 routes. His name on the holding company documents. 11 people who had known all along. Who built this hidden system? Riven asked quietly. Kairos didn't answer immediately. He reached across and closed both screens. Turned off the terminal. That answer comes next, he said. When you're ready to hear it without burning the whole floor down. He moved toward the door. And Riven, standing alone in the blue-gray dark with the hum of servers that housed a second empire he hadn't known existed, felt the floor shift beneath everything he thought he'd built. He didn't sleep. Riven sat in the dark of his private office until 3 a.m., then until 4, then until the city outside began producing that specific pre-dawn gray that came before actual light, the color of something that hadn't decided what it was yet. The map kept reassembling itself in his head. Not the financial architecture. Not the shell companies or the routes or the 11 names he still didn't have. That would come. He knew how to process that. He dealt with fraud before. Dealt with leaks, hostile restructurings, regulatory exposure. What kept reassembling was something else. The acquisition? He'd flown to Chicago on a Tuesday. 48 hours of due diligence compressed into a single long conference session because the timeline was competitive, and the numbers were too clean to argue with, and his gut, which had never failed him, had said yes. His father had built the first version of this company through force of will and 20-hour workdays, and the kind of ruthlessness that people write business books about. When Riven inherited control at 31, the handover had been described publicly as seamless. Clean transition. His father's exact words. Standing now in the dark, Riven turned that phrase over slowly. Clean transition. Like a stone that looks smooth until you pick it up and something moves underneath it. Had his father known? That question opened something Riven didn't have a prepared answer for. He didn't ask it again. At 7 a.m., he showered. Put on a suit. Rode the elevator up to the executive floor. Sat at his desk and opened his calendar like it was any other morning. At 7:42, Kairos walked past the open office door. He didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't look in. But Riven watched him pass. That same unhurried stride, that same complete absence of performance, and felt something tighten in his chest that he chose not to examine directly. He called out, "Vale." Kairos stopped in the hallway. Came back 2 steps. Stood in the doorframe. Either of them spoke for a moment. Riven studied him, the set of his jaw, the way he held stillness without effort, the eyes that looked at Riven not with the calculation of someone managing an asset but with something that felt uncomfortably close to understanding. No one looked at Riven like that. Most people looked at him like a variable. Something to be managed. Something to be navigated around or capitalized on or survived. Even the people who liked him. They liked him at a careful distance, with one eye on what he might do next. Kairos looked at him like he'd already accounted for all of that, and had decided it wasn't the most important thing in the room. It was deeply unsettling. "You're not going to give me those names today, are you?" Riven said. "No," Kairos said. "You're not going to tell me who built the system either." "Not yet. And if I have my team pull you in for a formal interview, legal, HR, security present, and we make it official?" Kairos considered that for a moment. "Then you'll lose whatever I was about to show you next," he said. "Your call." Riven held his gaze. The problem was Kairos was right. Again. For the 3rd or 4th time in as many days, this man had walked directly up to the line of what Riven wanted to do, named it accurately, and explained precisely why it was the wrong move. Not with arrogance. Not with the pleasure of someone proving a point. Just facts. Laid out flat. Like someone who had watched enough situations collapse to know which thread not to pull first. "Why?" Riven said finally. Kairos tilted his head slightly. "Why what? You could walk. You've made your point. You've shown me enough to blow this entire operation open without my cooperation. You don't need me for whatever comes next." Riven leaned back. "So why are you still here?" Something moved in Kairos's expression. Not much. A fraction of something. There and gone, like a signal in a frequency most people didn't listen for. "Everyone who's ever worked inside an empire like yours," Kairos said, "eventually starts to look like the empire. Starts to make its decisions. Starts to protect its structure even when the structure is the problem." He paused. "I've never met a man at the top of one of these who made me think he was still separate from it." Riven said nothing. "You made a different face when you saw those routes," Kairos said quietly. "Most men at your level, they make a containment face. The face that's already calculating distance and deniability." He stopped. "You didn't." The morning light came through the window between them. Riven looked at him for a long moment. "What face did I make?" he asked. Kairos held his gaze. "The right one. That sat in the room like something physical." Neither man moved. Then Riven said, "You came here to take this empire apart." Kairos didn't deny it. "Yes." "And now?" The pause that followed wasn't long. But it held more weight than most conversations Riven had ever had. "No," Kairos said. "I'm waiting to see what you choose when you finally know the truth." He held Riven's gaze for one more second, then turned and walked back down the hallway. And Riven sat alone in the growing morning light, hands flat on the desk, with the particular silence of a man whose foundation has just shifted beneath him, and who isn't sure yet whether that means something is collapsing, or something is finally being built right. The file hit Riven's desk at 6:02 a.m. No sender name. No subject line. Just an encrypted folder that bypassed his security system entirely, and landed inside his private drive like it had always been there. He opened it. 43 pages. And by page 3, everything Riven thought he knew about Kairos Vale stopped being a mystery and became something far more complicated. The organization didn't have an official name. It operated across 7 countries. It had no government affiliation, no charter, no public record of any kind. But it had a methodology, documented, precise, and repeated across 18 separate operations over 6 years. They entered organizations from inside. Not as auditors. Not as law enforcement. Not as whistleblowers. As employees. They embedded. Observed. Mapped the hidden systems. Identified the people protecting them. And then, without warrants, without press releases, without any of the machinery that normal investigations required, they removed those systems entirely. No arrests. No trials. The operations just stopped. The people responsible for them stopped too. Riven sat with that last line for a long moment. Stopped. He turned to page 11. There was a partial list of completed operations. Coded names, not real ones. But the industries were listed. Financial services. Pharmaceutical distribution. Private logistics. Maritime shipping. Every single one, a legitimate business on the surface. A different business underneath. Every single one, dismantled from the inside. By people like Kairos. Riven turned to the last page. One line, handwritten at the bottom of an otherwise typed document. Current operation, Kale Holdings. Entry. Confirmed. Status, pending subject decision. He read it twice. Subject decision. He was the subject. That matters. Pause on that. Riven stood. Walked to the window. The city below was barely awake. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the first buses running half-empty through morning streets. He'd been the target. From day one, from the moment Kairos walked into that boardroom and sat calmly while a dozen careers ended around him, this had been deliberate. Calculated. Designed. And yet. Riven thought about the server room. The map. The routes. The look on Kairos's face when he'd said the people buried in those routes needed it stopped fast. He thought about the file he was holding. Kairos hadn't had to send it. If the goal was to dismantle Riven's empire, quietly, efficiently, the way this organization always operated, the information Kairos already had was enough. Riven didn't need to know who Kairos was. That wasn't part of the process. Kairos had sent it anyway. Why? At 7:30 a.m., Riven walked down to the 28th floor. Kairos was standing at a window at the end of the hallway, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up below. He didn't turn when Riven's footsteps approached. "You sent me the file," Riven said. "Yes. That's not how your organization operates." A pause. "No," Kairos said. "It's not." Riven stopped beside him. Both men looked out at the same skyline. "So why?" Kairos turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. That small movement, deliberate, unhurried, was the closest thing to visible uncertainty Riven had ever seen from him. "Because every operation I've run," Kairos said, "I've walked in knowing what I'd find. Knowing who the man at the top was. Knowing what kind of choices he'd made to get there. He stopped. With you, I was wrong about something. What? What you knew? He turned to look at Riven directly. Most men in your position know exactly what's running underneath them. They built it. They use it. They protect it when it gets threatened. He held Riven's gaze. You didn't know. And when I showed you, you didn't reach for distance. You didn't calculate how to survive it. I got angry. Riven said. Yes, Kairos said. At the right thing. The city moved below them. Both men quiet. Justice doesn't always arrive in uniforms. Kairos said quietly. Sometimes it arrives without a sound, and leaves nothing behind. Riven looked at him. You came here to destroy me, Riven said. Kairos held his gaze for a long second. No, he said softly. I came to see if you were worth saving. And before Riven could respond to that, before he could decide what to do with a sentence that landed somewhere in his chest that he hadn't expected, his phone rang. Damon. Voice tight. Wrong kind of tight. Sir? We have a problem. Building breach. Armed team. Executive floors. Riven went still. How many? At least 8. They came in through the service entrance on 41. They're moving fast, and they know the layout. Riven looked at Kairos. Kairos had already set down his coffee. His entire posture had changed. Not tensed. Not panicked. Focused. The way a weapon focuses before it fires. Who sent them? Riven asked, and he wasn't asking Damon. Kairos was already moving toward the stairwell. The 11 people I haven't named yet, he said. They know you saw the map. They moved fast. Kairos took the stairwell door without hesitating, pushed through before it had fully opened, and was already 3 steps up before Riven processed that he was following a man he still didn't fully understand into a building that was currently being breached by armed operatives who had apparently decided tonight was the night to clean house. You knew this was coming, Riven said, keeping his voice low as they climbed. I knew it was a possibility, Kairos said without slowing. When you saw the map, the people protecting that system would have been notified. Some of them are inside your security infrastructure. My own security. 3 of your 11. He reached a landing. Stopped. Pressed his back to the wall and listened. The other 8 are contractors. Brought in tonight specifically. How do you know that? Kairos looked at him. Because I'm the one who monitors their communication channels. That landed. Riven filed it and kept moving. They came out on 36. The floor was empty, most staff not yet in for the morning, the few early arrivals already scattered by security alerts. Monitors still running. Coffee cups still warm. The specific eerie stillness of a place that had been people 30 seconds ago. Kairos moved through it like he'd memorized the floor plan. Which, Riven realized, he probably had. He pulled Riven into a server alcove at the northeast corner. There are 2 exits they haven't covered yet, Kairos said. Sublevel parking and the freight elevator on 33. The parking route gets you out of the building but leaves you exposed on the street before you can reach a vehicle. He paused. 33 keeps you inside until we know what we're dealing with. We, Riven said. Kairos didn't acknowledge the emphasis. 33, he said again. They went to 33. The freight elevator was slow and loud and smelled like industrial cleaner. Riven had never ridden it in 6 years of owning this building. It opened on a loading corridor that ran beneath the main lobby, concrete floors, pipeline ceilings, the kind of utilitarian infrastructure that expensive architecture hides from view. Kairos moved down the corridor without turning on the lights. He navigated by memory. Riven stayed close. And in the dark, moving fast through a corridor beneath his own empire, he had a thought that cut clean through everything else. This man had walked into his building with a mission to dismantle it. And right now, he was the only person in the entire building actively keeping Riven alive. A sound ahead. Both men stopped. Footsteps. 2 sets. Moving toward them from the East Service entrance. Kairos put a hand flat on Riven's chest, brief, 1 second, and pushed him back into a maintenance doorway. The footsteps passed. Didn't stop. Neither man breathed until the sound faded. Then Kairos moved again. Turned left. Through a door marked HVAC that opened on a narrow mechanical room packed with ductwork and conduit. He went straight through it like he'd been here before. Because he had. 14 months of preparation. He mapped every inch. Stop, Riven said. Kairos stopped. Turned. In the low light of the mechanical room, orange emergency strip lighting running along the floor, Riven looked at him. You protected me back there, Riven said. You didn't have to. We're not out yet, Kairos said. I know. But you did it anyway. He held his gaze. That's not mission protocol, is it? Kairos didn't answer. Which was its own answer. A sound above them, something heavy shifting on the floor overhead. The operatives were on 33 now. Moving methodically. The way trained teams move when they have time and a target. We need to keep moving, Kairos said. Where are we going? Kairos reached into his jacket. Pulled out a phone, different from any Riven had seen him carry before. Pressed 2 buttons. Safe location, he said. 12 minutes from here. Off-grid. Untraceable. He looked at Riven. Can you trust me for 12 minutes? It was the first time Kairos had ever asked him for anything directly. Riven held that question for exactly 2 seconds. I trusted you for the last 6 days without knowing who you were, he said. 12 minutes is manageable. Something moved in Kairos's expression. Almost like relief. But layered under something harder to name. They moved. 3 more corridors. A locked door that Kairos opened with a tool from his jacket that Riven did not ask about. A service exit on the building's west side that opened onto a narrow street most people who worked in the building didn't know existed. A car. Dark. Running. Already there. The driver didn't turn around. Didn't speak. Kairos opened the rear door. Riven got in. The door closed. The car moved. And in the back seat, Riven looked at Kairos, really looked at him. For the first time without the architecture of the building around them, without the hierarchy of employer and employee or target and operative, or any of the other frameworks that had been layered between them since that first morning. Just 2 men. In a moving car. Running from something that had been operating inside Riven's empire for years before he knew it existed. You're the most dangerous person I've ever met, Riven said. Kairos looked out the window. I know, he said. Not proud of it. Just accurate. And you're the only reason I'm still alive right now. Kairos didn't respond to that. But his jaw shifted slightly. 1 degree. And Riven, who had spent his entire adult life learning how to read the things people refuse to say out loud, filed that away. The location was a converted warehouse unit in a part of the city where nobody looked at cars pulling up at 8 a.m. and nobody asked questions about why a man in a tailored suit was walking through an unmarked door. Inside clean. Functional. Nothing extra. 2 workstations. A secure comms terminal. A folding table with a water bottle and 2 chairs that looked like they'd been placed there intentionally. Like someone had thought about this meeting before it happened. Riven sat. Kairos stood at the terminal for a moment, checked something, pressed a key, stepped back. We're dark, he said. No active surveillance within 6 blocks. The team in your building is going to spend the next 2 hours searching for you before they realize you're gone. And when they do, they'll report failure. He turned around. Which creates its own problem for them. Riven leaned back in the chair. Because whoever sent them now knows their operation is compromised. Yes. So they accelerate. Probably. Riven looked at him. Tell me everything. Kairos sat in the second chair. Elbows on his knees. That stillness of his, but closer now, different in this smaller space, without the 30 floors of corporate distance between them. My organization, he said, runs between 3 and 5 active operations at any given time. We get referred cases. People inside systems like yours who can't go to authorities because the system they're inside of has already compromised the authorities. He paused. Your case came to us 14 months ago. From who? Someone inside your legal team. A junior associate who stumbled onto a payment discrepancy, and knew exactly what it meant and knew exactly what would happen to him if he flagged it internally. Riven thought about that. A junior associate. Someone who'd seen something, understood it, and been afraid enough to go outside the building entirely. He's safe? Riven asked. Kairos looked at him. The question had come out before Riven thought about it. Yes, Kairos said after a beat. He's been relocated. Good. Riven said it flat. Meant it. Something in Kairos's posture shifted fractionally. I came in 6 days after confirmation. Kairos continued. The plan was standard. Map the system. Identify the active participants. Extract the evidence. Dismantle from inside without triggering a public exposure that would allow the key players to launder their way out of liability. And destroy my empire in the process. Riven said. The legitimate parts would have survived. Kairos said. The hidden system would not. That's not the same as what I built. No, Kairos said. It's not. Silence. Sometimes trust doesn't come from safety. Kairos said quietly. It comes from surviving the same threat. Riven looked at him directly. You told me that line like you've said it before. I have. Does it usually work? Kairos held his gaze. You're the first person I've said it to and meant it, he said. That landed differently than Riven expected. He didn't look away. Neither did Kairos. The comms terminal beeped once. Kairos checked it. Read something. His expression didn't change, but the set of his shoulders shifted in a way Riven was starting to recognize. What? Riven said. The hidden system, Kairos said. Someone triggered an activation protocol. The next phase of the transport routes, it's being scheduled. When? 72 hours. Riven stood. Who triggered it? Kairos turned to face him. The person who built it. Riven waited. Your father's former CFO, Kairos said. Cornelius Ashby. He's been running the hidden architecture since before your acquisition. He stayed quiet while you built. Stayed quiet while you grew. He paused. He activated now because he knows the map has been seen. He's trying to move the operation before it can be stopped. Riven's jaw tightened. Cornelius Ashby? He'd met that man at 12 years old. Had shaken his hand at his father's retirement ceremony at 31. Had sent him a bottle of good whiskey every year since. He's been running this for how long? Riven said. 11 years. 11 years. 3 years before Riven took control. And my father didn't know, Kairos said. I verified that before I verified you. The room was quiet for a moment. Riven processed that. His father hadn't known. He hadn't known. 2 generations of a man's name on a building, and something else entirely operating in its shadow. You have a choice, Kairos said. His voice was direct. No softening. I can take this from here. My team moves on Ashby, we stop the activation, we extract the evidence and hand it to the right people. Your cooperation so far creates a degree of protection. You cooperate fully, you come out of this with your name damaged but survivable. And the other choice? Riven said. Kairos held his gaze. You take the lead, he said. You call the meeting. You set the trap. You're the one who brings Ashby in, not law enforcement, not my team. You. He paused. It's harder. It's riskier. And it means that when this surfaces publicly, and it will, you're standing on the right side of it, visibly. He hadn't left yet. Riven turned that over. Kairos hadn't left. He could have. He had everything he needed. He had an operation running, a team on standby, a mandate that didn't require Riven's participation or approval. He was still here. Sitting in a chair across from Riven in a warehouse in the early morning, laying out choices like he actually cared which one Riven picked. Why haven't you left? Riven said. The question came out quieter than he intended. Kairos looked at him. A long look. The kind that didn't rush toward an answer. You're not the man I expected, Kairos said finally. Riven felt that move through him. Neither are you, he said. 72 hours. That was the window. Riven stood at the warehouse workstation at 9 a.m. with Kairos beside him and a city full of people who had no idea that somewhere beneath the surface of a company they'd never heard of, a transport activation was being staged that would move human beings across 3 international lines before the week ended. 72 hours. He'd had less time than that to close deals worth 9 figures. This was different. Walk me through the setup, Riven said. Kairos pulled up the system map. The same one from the server room, but updated. 2 new nodes added since yesterday. Ashby had been moving fast, repositioning assets, rerouting contact points, covering the tracks that Kairos had already documented. He was afraid. Good. Ashby controls the activation through a private communications relay, Kairos said. The relay runs through a shell company he's held since 2016. It's not connected to Kale Holdings on paper, but it draws operational funding through 3 layers of accounts that trace back to your 2019 acquisition. So my money funds it, Riven said. Has been funding it. That burned in his chest. He let it burn. Used it. What does he need from me to finalize the activation? Kairos looked at him. A signature, he said. On a cross-border logistics approval. Routine document. He's had it routed through your standard operations pipeline. It's sitting in your assistance queue right now, flagged for your sign-off. He needs my name on it. He always has. That's how the system was designed. Every major activation requires a document with legitimate executive authorization, something that creates legal distance for Ashby and legal exposure for you. Riven looked at the screen. This was the design. Not just a hidden operation running under his name. An architecture specifically built to require his signature, unknowingly, routinely, without context, so that if the system ever surfaced, his name was on it and Ashby's was buried 3 layers deep. He's been doing this for 11 years, Riven said. Yes. With my father. Then with me. Yes. Riven stepped back from the terminal. Breathed once. This was the moment Kairos had been describing. The one where most men calculated distance and deniability. The one where the instinct was to protect structure, to call lawyers and PR teams and crisis managers and begin the careful work of insulation. He thought about the routes on that map. 12 of them. People. Not products. Not capital. Not cargo. People. Here's what I want to do, Riven said. Kairos waited. I signed the document. But I alter the routing authorization, 1 line, buried in the logistics addendum. It redirects the first movement checkpoint to a location your team controls. He looked at Kairos directly. Ashby triggers the activation. The network moves and walks directly into your people. Kairos held very still. That's not a standard takedown, he said. No. It puts you at legal risk. If the document alteration is detected before activation, then it doesn't work and we go to your original plan, Riven said. But if it does work, every person Ashby has protected for 11 years gets exposed in a single operation. Not just him. All of them. Kairos studied him. You'd be burning your own company to do this. I'd be burning the part that was never mine. The warehouse was quiet. Outside, a city moving through its morning. Traffic. Sound. Life. In here, just two men and a decision that couldn't be unmade once it was made. My team will need 4 hours to position, Kairos said. You have them. And you understand that once this is done, the financial exposure, the public record, the regulatory fallout, none of that disappears. You'll spend years in rebuilding. I know. Kairos held his gaze. Why? He said. Not challenging. Genuine. The way a man asks when he actually needs the answer. Riven looked at the map on the screen. The routes. The nodes. The 11 years of operation running in the dark under his name. Because they used me, he said. They built something monstrous and put my name on top of it like a roof. And every day I didn't know, they counted on that. They needed that. He paused. I'm done being needed for that. Kairos didn't respond immediately. He looked at Riven for a long moment, that same look from the warehouse chair, the one that held weight, and then he nodded once. Precise. Decided. I'll make the call, he said. He moved to the secure terminal. And Riven picked up his own phone. Called his assistant. The logistics approval in my queue, he said. Pull it up. I'm signing it today. He ended the call. Looked at the routing addendum he'd already drafted in his head. 1 line. 1 redirect. Burn it. It took 11 days. Not 72 hours, 11 days, because these things never move at the speed you plan for, and Kairos had been honest about that from the start, and Riven had stopped expecting clean timelines somewhere around day 3. The activation triggered on day 4. Ashby's network moved and walked directly into a coordinated multi-agency operation that Kairos's team had been building the framework for since before Riven had ever heard the name Kairos Vale. Cornelius Ashby was taken into custody on a Thursday afternoon. Quietly. No press outside. No cameras. He walked out of a private luncheon in a building 3 blocks from Riven's, and into a situation from which nothing he'd spent 11 years constructing could protect him. 6 others were detained the same day. 2 more by the following Monday. The hidden system, all 12 routes, all 3 continents, all the layered financial architecture designed to make it invisible, stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Riven's company was not destroyed. Damaged. Yes. Visibly. Publicly. The financial exposure required disclosure, and the disclosure required a statement, and the statement required Riven to stand in front of people he'd spent years being untouchable in front of and say, "This happened under my name, I didn't know, and the moment I did, I moved to end it." Some believed him. Some didn't. That was the part he had to live with. What he didn't expect, what caught him with the specific weight of something he hadn't prepared for, was what happened to the parts of the company that were clean. They held. The teams he'd actually built. The people he'd hired for competence, and paid fairly and trusted with real work. They held through the investigation, through the restructuring, through the months of regulatory review that followed. They held because they'd been built on something real. Riven sat in his office on the 41st day after everything broke open, smaller office, different floor, same city skyline, and felt something he didn't have an immediate name for. Not relief. Not pride. Something quieter. Like a man who had been standing in a building with a false foundation and had finally felt the ground go solid beneath him. On day 42, Kairos came back. He didn't call first. Didn't send anything. Just appeared in the doorway of Riven's new office at 8:47 in the morning, in the same kind of jacket he always wore, with the same unhurried posture and those same eyes that held things Riven had spent 6 weeks thinking about more than he'd admitted to anyone. Riven looked up from his desk. Neither man spoke for a moment. "You were supposed to disappear," Riven said. "I did," Kairos said. "For 42 days. That's not disappearing. That's an extended absence." Something moved in Kairos's expression. That same fraction, that same almost something that showed up rarely and always cost him. "How's the rebuild?" he said. "Slow," Riven said. "Honest. Different." He paused. "Better." Kairos nodded once. He looked at the window. The city. The same skyline that had been there through all of it, indifferent, relentless, still turning. "My next operation," Kairos said. "It starts in 3 weeks. Where? I can't say. Dangerous? Always." Riven held that. "And after?" he said. Kairos looked back at him. "After is after," he said. "I don't usually plan that far." "I know," Riven said. "I'm asking anyway." The office was quiet. Morning light coming in at an angle, the city below already in full motion, the whole machine of the world turning like it always did. Riven stood up from his desk. Crossed the room. Stopped 2 feet from Kairos, close enough that the distance between them was no longer the kind that came from structure or hierarchy or the careful management of what each man was willing to let the other see. Just distance. And the choice about what to do with it. "You came here to take something apart," Riven said. "Yes. And you ended up building something instead." Kairos held his gaze. Something settled in his expression. Deep. Certain. The look of a man who has spent years moving through situations without leaving anything of himself behind, and has just decided, for the first time, to leave something. "Stay," Riven said. One word. No authority behind it. No leverage. No architecture of power or position. Just one man. Asking. Kairos looked at him for a long time. The city moved below them. "I don't stay," Kairos said. A pause. Longer than the words required. "But I might come back." He held Riven's gaze for one more second, something warm and guarded and real all at once, and then he turned toward the door. Stopped with his hand on the frame. Didn't look back. 3 weeks, he said. "Keep the lights on." And then he was gone. The way he always left. Without sound, without ceremony, without the kind of exit that asked for a response. Riven stood in the morning light. The city turned below. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, standing in a smaller office, inside a damaged company, with a man who had just walked out the door and a promise that weighed almost nothing and somehow everything, Riven Kale smiled. Not the kind that controlled rooms. The other kind.